The morning Zelda Lawrence's horse threw her into a ravine was the same morning she swore she'd never trust her father's judgment again. She tumbled down the rocky slope, feeling her shoulder slam against stone and her ribs scream in protest. And by the time she landed at the bottom in a cloud of dust and scattered pinon branches, the bay mare was already disappearing over the ridge, spooked by a rattlesnake that had been sunning itself on a flat rock. That was how it started, in the high desert country of New Mexico Territory in the summer of 1878, 30 miles from any settlement, with nothing but sagebrush and juniper stretching to the horizon in every direction. Zelda pulled herself to her feet, wincing at the sharp pain in her left ankle. She was 22 years old, educated at a finishing school in St. Louis, and she had argued with her father for months about making this trip to visit her aunt in Santa Fe. He had insisted she could manage the journey from Albuquerque with just a guide, but the guide had taken sick 2 days into the trip, and she had foolishly pressed on alone, convinced the trail was clear enough to follow. Now, standing in the bottom of a ravine with the sun climbing toward its merciless noon position, she understood what hubris meant. She climbed back up to the trail, favoring her good ankle, and surveyed the landscape. The horse was gone, truly gone, not even a dust cloud visible in the distance. With it went her canteen, her food supplies, her bedroll, and the rifle her father had insisted she carry. All she had were the clothes on her back, a small knife in her boot, and a handkerchief in her pocket. The realization of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. She chose a direction she thought might lead back toward the main road and started walking. The sun beat down with relentless intensity, turning the air into something thick and hard to breathe. By afternoon, she knew she had chosen wrong. The landscape looked nothing like what she had ridden through. She was in rougher country now, all broken mesas and deep arroyos, the kind of terrain where a person could wander for weeks and never see another human soul. On the second day, she found a small seep of water collecting in a rock depression and drank carefully, remembering her father's stories about dysentery. She tore strips from her petticoat to wrap her swelling ankle. The night was cold enough that she shivered constantly, huddled against a boulder, watching the stars wheel overhead and wondering if this was how her life would end. Alone in the wilderness because she had been too proud to wait for a proper escort. By the fourth day, she was rationing even her movements. Each step required a conscious decision. The water had run out again. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. She thought about her mother, dead these 5 years, and wondered if she would see her soon. She thought about the bookstore she had wanted to open in Albuquerque, about the argument she had had with her father before leaving, harsh words about independence and capability that now seemed like the foolish protests of a child. On the 6th day, Zelda collapsed in the shade of an overhang, unable to go farther. Her vision swam with dark spots. She tried to pray but could not remember the words. The sun moved across the sky and she drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes dreaming she was back in St. Louis, sometimes certain she heard voices calling her name. She did not hear the rider approach. The first she knew of another human presence was when a shadow fell across her face, blocking the late afternoon sun. She opened her eyes with effort and saw a man crouching beside her, his face weathered and concerned, his eyes the color of creek water. He touched her forehead gently, testing for fever, and his hand was cool and rough with calluses. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. "I have got you. Can you drink?" He held a canteen to her lips and she tried to gulp the water, but he pulled it back. "Slow, just a little at first. You will make yourself sick otherwise." She managed a few sips and felt her throat, dry as sand, begin to remember what moisture was. "Who are you?" she whispered. Name is Mason Kane. I am a tracker working out of Fort Union. Been following your trail for the better part of 2 days. He gave her another careful sip of water. You are a lucky woman. Another day and I would not have found you in time. My horse threw me. I figured as much when I found where you went down that ravine. You have been walking in circles, mostly. Covered maybe 15 miles, but stayed within a 5-mile radius the whole time. He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. Can you stand if I help you? I think so. Mason Kane was a tall man, lean in the way of someone who lived in the saddle, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw shadowed with several days of beard growth. He could not have been more than 26 or 27. When he helped her to her feet, she realized how weak she had become. Her legs trembled, and without his supporting arm around her waist, she would have fallen. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding, waited patiently a few yards away. Mason helped her over to it and lifted her into the saddle with surprising gentleness. She swayed, and he steadied her with one hand while reaching for his canteen with the other. Drink a bit more. We have a hard ride ahead, but I know a place we can make camp before dark. There is water there, and I can get some food into you. How did you find me? Zelda asked as he swung up behind her in the saddle, one arm circling her waist to keep her secure. Your father hired me 5 days ago when you did not arrive in Santa Fe as expected. He was half crazy with worry. I picked up your trail heading off the main road and followed it to where you went down. After that, it was just a matter of reading sign and guessing where someone without water would go. He urged the horse into a steady walk. You did some things right. You found that seep. You stayed out of the full sun when you could. Most folks in your situation would have panicked and run themselves to death the first day. The motion of the horse made her dizzy, and she found herself leaning back against Mason's chest. He smelled of leather and wood smoke and sweat, a masculine smell that should have been unpleasant but somehow was not. His arm around her waist was solid and reassuring. I panicked, she admitted quietly. I just did it slowly. She felt more than heard his quiet laugh. Well, slow panic is better than fast panic. Kept you alive long enough for me to reach you. They rode in silence for a time. Zelda drifted, not quite sleeping but not fully conscious either. She became aware of the landscape changing around them, the harsh rock giving way to grassland, and then she saw the line of cottonwoods that marked a creek bed. Mason guided the horse down to the water and dismounted, then helped her down carefully. Sit here, he said, settling her on a smooth rock near the creek bank. I am going to set up camp and get a fire going. You just rest. She watched him work with the efficiency of long practice. He unsaddled the buckskin and hobbled it to graze, then gathered wood and had a small fire burning within minutes. From his saddlebags, he produced a pot, coffee, strips of dried meat, and hardtack. He filled the pot with water from the creek and set it on the fire to boil. Not much of a meal, but it will do for tonight, he said. Tomorrow we will make Fort Union and you can have a proper dinner. How far is it? 20 miles, give or take. We will leave at first light. He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. Your ankle is swollen. Let me look at it. Zelda hesitated, then nodded. Mason knelt in front of her and carefully removed her boot. She winced as the leather pulled away from the swollen flesh. His hands were gentle as he examined the joint, probing carefully. Not broken, I think. Bad sprain. You must have done it in the fall. He stood and walked to the creek, where he soaked his bandana in the cold water, then returned and wrapped it around her ankle. Keep that on tonight. The cold will help with the swelling. Thank you, Zelda said, for everything. I would have died out there. Mason met her eyes for a long moment. In the firelight, his face was all plains and shadows, handsome in a rough-hewn way that had nothing to do with refinement and everything to do with strength and character. You are welcome. It is what I do. Track lost people. Track anyone or anything. Lost people, outlaws, stolen horses, Apache raiders, whatever the army needs or whoever is paying. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. Drink this slow too. Your stomach is going to be delicate for a day or two. They sat by the fire as darkness fell over the land. The coffee was strong and bitter, but Zelda had never tasted anything better. Mason soaked strips of the dried meat in hot water to soften them, then gave her small pieces to chew slowly. Her stomach cramped at first, then settled. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked after a while. "Your father said you were traveling to Santa Fe." "I was. I had a guide, but he fell ill. I thought I could manage the rest of the way by myself." She stared into the fire. "I was wrong. City woman, St. Louis for 7 years. Before that, Albuquerque. My father owns a freight company." She glanced at him. "I suppose I seem very foolish to you." "You seem like someone who made a mistake," Mason said. "We all make them. Difference is, some mistakes are more costly than others. Out here, the margin for error is thin." "You sound like my father." "He is probably right then." Mason added more wood to the fire. "This country does not forgive ignorance or bad luck. You need to respect it, learn its ways. That takes time." "How long have you been out here?" "All my life. Grew up in Texas, near San Antonio. My father was a ranger before he settled down to ranch. He taught me tracking, hunting, how to read the land. When the ranch failed after the war, I came west and hired on as a scout for the army." He sipped his coffee. "Been doing it for 8 years now." "Do you like it?" Mason considered the question. "Like is a strange word for it." "It is what I am good at. It is what makes sense to me. I understand the land, understand how to follow sign, how to find what is hidden. People are more complicated, but their tracks do not lie." Zelda felt herself relaxing despite her exhaustion. There was something calming about Mason's presence, a quiet competence that made her feel safe for the first time in 6 days. She studied his profile as he gazed into the fire, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes reflected the flames. "You must think I am terribly naive," she said. "I think you are educated and probably used to being capable in your world. This just is not your world." He turned to look at her. "No shame in that. I would be lost in a fancy ballroom or a city street. Put me in wild country, though, and I know every plant, every animal track, every weather sign. We all have our places where we fit. Where do you think I fit? That is for you to figure out, not me." He stood and spread out his bedroll, then retrieved a blanket from his saddle. "You take the bedroll tonight. I will keep the fire going and sleep light, just in case." "Just in case of what?" "Apache occasionally come through this area. Probably nothing to worry about, but I do not take chances." He must have seen her expression because he added, "Do not fret. They would have to get past me first, and I am a very light sleeper." Despite her fear, or perhaps because she was too exhausted for fear to take hold, Zelda slept deeply that night, wrapped in Mason's bedroll with the smell of his scent surrounding her. She woke once in the darkest part of the night and saw him sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness beyond the circle of light. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, something that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way he looked in that moment, alert and protective. She closed her eyes and drifted back to sleep. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. Mason had already saddled the buckskin and was packing up the camp when Zelda stirred. Her whole body ached and her ankle throbbed, but the desperate weakness of the previous day had eased. She felt almost human again. "How are you feeling?" Mason asked, handing her a cup of coffee and more softened jerky. "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle, but better than yesterday. Good. We have a long ride ahead." He helped her to her feet and over to the horse. "I am going to put you in front again. Easier to keep you steady that way." Once more, she found herself in the saddle with Mason's arm around her waist, his chest solid against her back. The contact should have been improper, but propriety seemed like a luxury from another world out here. She needed his support to stay on the horse, and that was all that mattered. They rode through country that was beautiful in its harshness. Mesas rose in the distance like ancient fortresses. Hawks circled overhead. Once, Mason pointed out a small herd of pronghorn antelope in the distance, moving like ghosts across the plain. He talked as they rode, telling her about the land, teaching her to read it the way he did. "See how the grass is greener there. That means water somewhere underground close to the surface. And those birds circling, turkey vultures, something died out there probably a few days ago. Could be a deer, could be a cow from one of the ranches. The vultures will clean it up." "How do you know all this?" Zelda asked, watching, listening. "My father used to take me out for days at a time when I was a boy. He would show me things, then test me on them. What direction the wind was blowing, what made those tracks, how old they were. I got it wrong plenty at first, but eventually it became second nature. It sounds like a good childhood. Parts of it were." Something in his tone suggested there were parts that were not, but he did not elaborate, and she did not push. By midday, they stopped to rest the horse and stretch. Mason helped Zelda down and examined her ankle again. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the joint was still discolored and tender. "You are going to need to stay off this for a week or two once we reach the fort," he said. "Let it heal properly, or it will trouble you the rest of your life." "A week or two? I need to get to Santa Fe. My aunt is expecting me." "Your aunt will wait. Your father will probably want to see you first anyway. Make sure you are all right before he lets you out of his sight again." Mason's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "He was pretty shaken up when he came looking for me. Offered to pay me double my usual rate if I found you alive. He loves me in his way. We just do not always see eye to eye." "What do you not see eye to eye about?" Zelda sighed. "Everything lately. He thinks I should settle down, marry one of the merchants or ranchers he does business with, give him grandchildren. I want more than that. I want to do something meaningful with my life, open a bookstore, maybe teach. He thinks those are foolish dreams for a woman." "Are they?" Mason asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I do not think so. Why should men be the only ones who get to decide what to do with their lives? They should not be." He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "Seems to me a person who is smart enough to read and teach is smart enough to make their own choices." Zelda felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "You really believe that? Why would I not? I have met plenty of stupid men and plenty of smart women. Being born one way or the other does not determine what you are capable of." He stood and offered her his hand. "We should get moving. Want to reach the fort before dark." As they rode through the afternoon, Zelda found herself increasingly aware of Mason in a way that had nothing to do with needing his help. She noticed the way his voice rumbled through his chest when he spoke, the strength in his arms as he held her secure, the careful way he handled the horse. She had been courted by merchants and ranchers' sons, educated men who knew how to dance and make polite conversation, but none of them had ever made her feel the way Mason Kane did with his quiet competence and his direct way of speaking. It was ridiculous, of course. She had known him less than a day. He was a tracker, a man who lived by his wits in the wilderness, with no permanent home and probably no interest in settling down. Even if he were interested, what future could there be for them? Her father would never approve of a match with a man who made his living tracking for the army. But still, She could not help noticing the way her heart beat faster when his arm tightened around her waist, or the flutter she felt when he spoke close to her ear. Fort Union appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. It was a sprawling complex of adobe buildings arranged around a central parade ground, with high walls and watchtowers at the corners. Soldiers drilled in formation while supply wagons rumbled in and out of the main gates. Mason guided the buckskin through the gate, nodding to the sentries who clearly knew him. "Kane," one of them called. "You find that missing woman?" "I did. She needs medical attention and a place to rest." Mason rode directly to the post hospital, a long, low building on the north side of the parade ground. The post surgeon, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and efficient hands, examined Zelda thoroughly. Her ankle was indeed severely sprained but not broken. She was dehydrated and malnourished but would recover with rest and proper food. He wrapped her ankle in fresh bandages and instructed her to stay off it as much as possible. "You are very fortunate," he told her. "Another day or two, and we would be having a different conversation." Mason had waited outside during the examination. When Zelda emerged, leaning on a crutch the surgeon had provided, she found him talking to a distinguished-looking officer with silver hair and colonel's insignia. "Miss Lawrence," the officer said, turning to her. "Colonel Thompson. I am very glad Mr. Kane was able to locate you. Your father has been sending telegrams daily, increasingly frantic. I will wire him immediately that you are safe." "Thank you, Colonel. We have quarters prepared for you, nothing fancy but clean and private. You will stay here until you are fit to travel." He glanced at Mason. "Kane, the Army owes you another debt. Your fee will be paid in full, plus the bonus Miss Lawrence's father promised." "Appreciated, sir." Mason's tone was respectful but not servile. He had the bearing of a man who knew his worth. A sergeant's wife, a pleasant woman named Mrs. O'Brien, showed Zelda to her quarters, a small room with a bed, a washstand, and a chair. It felt like unimaginable luxury after 6 days in the wilderness. Mrs. O'Brien brought hot water for washing and promised to send dinner shortly. "You rest now, dear," she said kindly. "You have been through quite an ordeal." Zelda washed as best she could and changed into a clean dress Mrs. O'Brien had provided, one of her own that was slightly too large but infinitely better than the tattered, filthy clothes Zelda had been wearing. She sat on the bed and suddenly felt the full weight of everything that had happened. She had nearly died. If Mason had not found her, she would be dead right now, her bones bleaching in the sun in some nameless arroyo. A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She called for the visitor to enter, expecting Mrs. O'Brien with dinner, but it was Mason who stepped inside, hat in hand, looking oddly uncertain. "I wanted to check on you before I left," he said. "Make sure you were settled." "Left? You are leaving?" "I have a job starting tomorrow. Supposed to scout for a patrol heading down toward the Mescalero Reservation. There has been some trouble and they need someone who knows the country." "Oh." Zelda felt a sudden, sharp disappointment that she tried to hide. "Of course. You have work to do. I should not keep you." Mason stood there for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "I am glad I found you in time," he said finally. "I am glad you are all right. I am all right because of you. I owe you my life. You do not owe me anything. Your father is paying me well." But his eyes said something different, something that made Zelda's breath catch. "Will you come back through Fort Union?" she asked. "After your patrol, probably. I usually do." He met her gaze, and the connection between them was almost physical in its intensity. "Why?" "I would like to see you again, to thank you properly." "You do not need to thank me. Maybe I want to." Zelda stood, wincing as she put weight on her bad ankle and moved closer to him. You saved my life, Mason Kane. That means something." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Then he reached out and touched her cheek, just a brief brush of his fingertips, but it sent electricity through her entire body. "You take care of yourself, Zelda Lawrence," he said softly. "Stay off that ankle. Eat well. Get strong again." "I will." He nodded once, then turned and left before she could say anything more. She heard his bootsteps fade down the hallway, and then he was gone, and she was alone in the small room with the ghost of his touch still burning on her skin. Over the next week, Zelda recovered her strength. Mrs. O'Brien proved to be a generous hostess, bringing her meals and sitting to chat about life at the fort. The colonel's wife visited as well, a refined woman from Boston who was delighted to have another educated woman to talk to. They discussed books and music and art, all the things Zelda had missed during her time in New Mexico territory. But through it all, Zelda found her thoughts returning to Mason. She remembered the steadiness of his voice, the gentleness of his hands, the way he had looked at her in that last moment before leaving. She told herself it was gratitude, hero worship, a natural response to someone who had saved her life. But she knew it was more than that. Her father arrived on the 8th day, riding in with a small escort of hired guards. Zelda Lawrence was a big man in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his life building a business in hard country. When he saw Zelda, he pulled her into a crushing embrace and she felt him shaking. "Zelda, thank God. When you did not arrive, when days passed with no word, I thought I had lost you." "I am sorry, Papa. I should have waited for a new guide. You were right." He pulled back and looked at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I do not care about being right. I only care that you are alive. Mason Kane found you." "Yes, he tracked me for 2 days and found me just in time." "I need to find him, thank him properly. Where is he?" "On patrol." "He left the day after we arrived." Her father studied her face, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. He had not built a successful business without learning to read people. "This tracker, you like him?" It was not a question, but Zelda answered anyway. "I barely know him." "That is not what I asked," Zelda sighed. "Yes, Papa, I like him. He is different from anyone I have ever met. He is honest and capable and kind, and he does not think I am foolish for wanting more than marriage and children." "I do not think you are foolish," her father said quietly. "I think you are stubborn and independent and too smart for your own good sometimes, but not foolish. I worry about you, that is all. This is hard country, and I have seen what it does to people who are not prepared for it." "I know. I learned that the hard way." They spent 2 days at the fort, her father catching up with Colonel Thompson and arranging for an escort to take them back to Albuquerque. He tried to convince Zelda to come with him, but she insisted on continuing to Santa Fe once her ankle had healed. Her aunt was expecting her, and she was not going to let fear stop her from completing her journey. "Then you will wait until you are fully healed, and you will travel with proper guards and supplies," her father said firmly. "No arguments." "No arguments," Zelda agreed. On the morning her father was set to leave, he took her aside. "This tracker, Kane. If he is a good man, if he makes you happy, I will not stand in your way. But be sure, Zelda, be very sure. The life of a scout is a hard one, and it is not always long. Men in that work tend to die young or hard." "I know, Papa. Does he feel the same way about you?" "I do not know. Maybe, I think so." Her father kissed her forehead. "Then I hope I am wrong about the dying young part. I want you to be happy." After he left, Zelda spent her days reading in the fort's small library and taking short walks as her ankle healed. Mrs. O'Brien taught her to make bread and told her stories about her own courtship with the sergeant, a whirlwind romance that had started when he rescued her from a stagecoach accident 20 years earlier. "Sometimes love comes on quick," she said, kneading dough with strong, practiced hands. "My mother told me I was crazy to marry a man I had known for 2 weeks, but I knew he was the one. 20 years and 5 children later, I still know it." "How did you know?" Zelda asked. "I felt safe with him. Not just physically safe, though that was part of it. I felt like I could be myself, no pretending, no putting on airs. And when he looked at me, I saw that he liked what he saw, the real me, not some version I was trying to be." She shaped the dough into loaves and set them to rise. "That is what matters in the end. Finding someone who sees you and likes what they see." 3 weeks after arriving at Fort Union, Zelda's ankle was nearly healed. Colonel Thompson had arranged for an escort to take her to Santa Fe, 4 reliable soldiers who would ensure she arrived safely. She was packing her few belongings when Mrs. O'Brien knocked on her door. "There is someone here to see you, dear. That tracker fellow, Kane." Zelda's heart leaped. She tried to calm herself as she smoothed her dress and walked out to the fort's main courtyard. Mason stood near the gates, talking to one of the sergeants. He still wore the same dusty clothes, still looked like he had just ridden in from the wilderness. But to Zelda, he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. He turned as she approached, and his face lit up in a way that made her knees weak. "Zelda, you look well. Your ankle, much better. I can walk without the crutch now." She could not stop smiling. "You came back. I said I probably would." He glanced at the sergeant, who took the hint and wandered off. "I heard you are heading to Santa Fe tomorrow." "Yes, the colonel arranged an escort." "Good, that is good." He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically awkward. "Listen, I have been thinking about you." "About what you said, about wanting to see me again." "I have been thinking about you too," Zelda admitted. "I am not a man with much to offer," Mason said, the words coming out in a rush. "I live rough, move around a lot. I do not have a house or land or any of the things a woman usually wants. But I cannot stop thinking about you, and I figured I should tell you that before you rode off to Santa Fe and I lost my chance." Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What exactly are you saying?" "I am saying that I would like to court you properly if you will have me. I know we barely know each other, and I know your father probably expects you to marry someone more substantial, but I had to ask. I had to try." She closed the distance between them, taking his hands in hers. His palms were rough and warm. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will let you court me. I want that very much." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "Really, really, I have not been able to stop thinking about you either. You are honest and kind, and you see me as a person, not just a woman who should fit into a proper role. That means everything to me." Mason squeezed her hands gently. "When you get to Santa Fe, may I write to you? May I visit when I can?" "Yes, to both." They stood there in the courtyard, holding hands and grinning at each other like fools, until Colonel Thompson walked by and cleared his throat meaningfully. They sprang apart and Mason's ears turned red. "I should let you finish packing," he said, "but I will write, soon. You better." That night, Zelda lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, too excited to sleep. Tomorrow she would go to Santa Fe, to her aunt's house, to the life she had been planning. But now that life had the possibility of including Mason Kane, and that changed everything. The journey to Santa Fe took 3 days and passed without incident. The soldiers were professional and courteous, and they delivered Zelda safely to her aunt's door. Aunt Margaret was a widow in her 60s, sharp-minded and kind-hearted, who had turned her home into a boarding house for single women working in the city. She welcomed Zelda with open arms and 1,000 questions about her ordeal. "Your father wrote me everything," she said, pouring tea in her sunny parlor. I have never been so frightened in my life. And this tracker who found you, Kane, your father says he is a good man." "He is," Zelda said, and then, because she could not help herself, she told her aunt everything. About Mason's steady presence, his gentleness, the way he had looked at her, the courtship he had proposed. Aunt Margaret listened carefully, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "You love him," she said when Zelda finished. "I barely know him." "That is not what I asked, child." Zelda set down her teacup and met her aunt's gaze. "Yes, I think I do. Is that crazy, to fall in love with someone in a matter of days?" "Love does not follow a schedule. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes moments. The question is not how fast it happened, but whether it is real and whether it will last." Aunt Margaret poured more tea. "This man, does he make you happy?" "Yes." "Does he respect you?" "Yes." "Do you trust him?" "With my life." "Literally." "Then I would say you have your answer. The rest is just details to be worked out." The first letter from Mason arrived 2 weeks later. It was short and plainly written, but it made Zelda's heart sing. He wrote about his work, about tracking a group of horse thieves through the mountains, about sleeping under the stars and thinking of her. He wrote that he hoped she was well, that her ankle had fully healed, that she was happy in Santa Fe. He signed it simply, "Yours, Mason." She wrote back immediately, telling him about her aunt's boarding house, about the bookstore she had visited that sold maps and newspapers alongside novels, about how Santa Fe was different from Albuquerque but beautiful in its own way. She signed her letter, "Yours always, Zelda." The letters went back and forth through the summer and into fall. Mason's handwriting was rough but legible, his words spare but meaningful. He told her about the country he traveled through, about tracking through autumn rains and watching elk migrate through mountain meadows. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about his mother who had died when he was young, about his father who had been hard but fair. He told her things he said he had never told anyone else. Zelda responded with her own stories. She told him about her mother's death, about feeling lost for years afterward, about how reading had saved her. She told him about her dreams for the bookstore, about wanting to create a space where women could read and learn and grow. She told him she missed him, that she thought about him constantly, that she reread his letters until the paper was soft with handling. In October, Mason rode to Santa Fe. He arrived dusty and trail-worn, leading his buckskin and looking nervous as he knocked on Aunt Margaret's door. Zelda saw him from the parlor window and flew to the door, propriety forgotten. She threw it open and stood there, drinking in the sight of him. "Hello, Zelda," he said, his creek water eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hello, Mason, come in. Please come in." Aunt Margaret appeared in the hallway, took one look at them, and smiled. "Mr. Kane, I presume. I am Margaret Crawford. My niece has told me a great deal about you. All good, I hope, madam." "Good enough that I am willing to leave my parlor to you two for a few hours, properly unchaperoned, which is a scandal but one I am willing to tolerate." She winked at Zelda. "I will be in the kitchen if you need me." Alone in the parlor, Mason and Zelda stood awkwardly for a moment. Then Zelda laughed and took his hand, pulling him to sit beside her on the settee. "I missed you," she said. "I missed you too. Your letters have been the best part of my days." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small package wrapped in cloth. "I brought you something." Inside was a piece of turquoise, polished smooth and strung on a simple leather cord. It was the exact color of the New Mexico sky. "I found it near Taos," Mason said. "Reminded me of your eyes." "My eyes are not blue." "No, but they have the same light in them, the same clarity." He took the cord and fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin and sending shivers through her. "There, it suits you." Zelda touched the turquoise, smooth and warm, against her throat. "It is beautiful, thank you." They talked for hours, making up for months of letters. Mason told her about a mountain lion he had tracked for a rancher, about a particularly difficult river crossing, about sleeping in snow at high elevation. Zelda told him about helping at a small school, about the books she had been reading, about her plans for the bookstore. "Your father came to see me last month," Mason said during a lull in the conversation. "Did you know that?" "No, he did not mention it. He wanted to take my measure, I think, make sure I was serious about you. We talked for a long time. He is a good man, your father." "What did you tell him?" Mason took her hands in his expression serious. "I told him that I love you, that I have loved you since I found you in that arroyo, half dead and still brave, that I know I am not the match he probably wants for you, but that I would spend my life making you happy if you would let me." Tears pricked Zelda's eyes. "What did he say?" "He said that you are stubborn and independent and that you would make up your own mind regardless of what he wanted. But he also said that if I hurt you, he would hunt me down personally, and I believe him." Mason smiled slightly. "Then he gave me his blessing, provided you wanted it." "I want it," Zelda whispered. "I love you, Mason. I have loved you for months. I just did not know if it was too soon to say it." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and careful, as if she were something precious. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, 6 months of longing pouring into that single moment of contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know I do not have much, but marry me anyway. Let me spend my life with you." "Yes," Zelda said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." Aunt Margaret was suspiciously close to the parlor door when they emerged, and her smile suggested she had heard everything. She embraced Mason warmly and immediately began planning a wedding. "Nothing too fancy," Zelda protested. "We do not need a spectacle." "Nonsense. You are my only niece, and I will throw you a proper wedding or die trying. Small but proper." Aunt Margaret was already making lists. "We will have it here in the parlor. Father Martinez can officiate. Late November, I think, before the worst of the winter weather." Mason stayed in Santa Fe for 3 days, sleeping in a hotel and spending every waking hour with Zelda. They walked through the plaza, visited the market, talked endlessly about their future. Mason had saved most of his army pay over the years and had enough to buy a small piece of land if he wanted to settle down. "I have been thinking about that," he said as they sat in the plaza watching children play. "About settling. I could start a guide service, hire on to survey parties or wagon trains, still use my skills but sleep in a bed more often, be home more." "You do not have to give up your work for me," Zelda said. "I am not giving it up, I am changing it. There is a difference. I want a life with you, Zelda. I want to come home to you every night, wake up next to you every morning. That is worth more than any job." "What about the bookstore?" "What about it? You open your bookstore, I will help however I can. We will build a life together, both doing what we love." It sounded impossibly perfect, and yet Zelda believed it. Believed in him, in them, in the possibility of happiness. When Mason left to return to Fort Union, to finish out his current contract with the Army, Zelda threw herself into wedding preparations. Aunt Margaret proved to be an organizational genius, managing to arrange everything in a matter of weeks. Zelda's father arrived from Albuquerque with a wagon load of gifts and a relief so profound it made him cry when he embraced her. "He is a good man, your tracker," he said. "Rough around the edges but solid. That is what matters." The wedding took place on a clear November morning with frost sparkling on the ground. Father Martinez performed the ceremony in Aunt Margaret's parlor, which had been decorated with pine boughs and candles. Zelda wore a simple blue dress that matched her turquoise necklace. Mason wore new clothes that he looked uncomfortable in, but his eyes, when he saw her walking toward him, made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. They spoke their vows quietly, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they lived. When Mason slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band he had commissioned from a silversmith in Santa Fe, Zelda felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that she had been searching for her entire life. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. Aunt Margaret served a feast she had been preparing for days. Zelda's father made a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Mrs. O'Brien and the sergeant had traveled from Fort Union for the occasion and regaled everyone with stories of Zelda's recovery at the fort. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Mason took Zelda's hand and led her upstairs to the room they would share that night before heading to their new home. He had bought a small house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, just far enough from the city for privacy, but close enough for Zelda to pursue her bookstore dream. In the quiet of their room, with moonlight streaming through the window, Mason held her close and whispered against her hair, "I never thought I would find you." "I never thought I would find you either," Zelda replied, "but I am so glad I got lost in that wilderness." "I am so glad you found me." He pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "I will always find you. No matter how lost you get, no matter how far you wander, I will always track you down and bring you home. Promise, promise." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with gentle hands and soft words. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Zelda felt a completeness she had never known. This was home, not a place but a person, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Mason started his guide service and proved to be as skilled at leading survey parties as he had been at tracking. The work was steady and paid well, and he was home far more often than he had been when working for the Army. Zelda opened her bookstore in a small shop on the plaza, selling not just books but maps and newspapers and offering reading groups for women. It became a gathering place, somewhere women could discuss ideas and learn without judgment. Their first child was born in the autumn of 1880, a boy with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Matthew Lawrence Kane, after no one in particular, just because they liked the sound of it. Mason proved to be a doting father, patient and playful, teaching his son to track animals through the yard before the boy could even walk properly. 3 years later, they had a daughter, Zara Margaret, named for Zelda and her aunt. The little girl had her mother's intelligence and her father's calm demeanor. Aunt Margaret, now in her 70s but still sharp, doted on her namesake and taught her to cook and garden. In 1885, Zelda's father passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was Mason who held her through the grief, who understood without needing to be told that she was mourning not just her father, but also all the years they had spent at odds before finally understanding each other. At the funeral, Mason spoke about Zelda Lawrence's love for his daughter, about how the man had trusted Mason to keep her safe, and how he had never taken that trust lightly. The bookstore thrived. Zelda hired 2 women to help her run it and began offering literacy classes in the back room. She taught women to read and write, giving them tools to better their lives. Mason sometimes sat in on the classes, comfortable in his own skin and unbothered by being the only man in a room full of women learning their letters. In 1888, they had another son, Michael James, who was loud and energetic from birth. Their house on the outskirts of Santa Fe was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Mason built furniture in his spare time, sturdy chairs and tables that would last for generations. The children grew up understanding the story of how their parents met. Matthew, serious and thoughtful, liked to ask his father about tracking. Zara, creative and imaginative, made her mother tell the story over and over, adding different details each time. Michael, adventurous and fearless, announced at age 5 that he was going to get lost so his father could find him, which led to a long conversation about wilderness safety. By 1895, the children were becoming young adults. Matthew, at 15, was already working with his father, learning the guide business and proving to have inherited Mason's skill for reading the land. Zara, at 12, was helping in the bookstore and writing stories that made Zelda's heart ache with pride. Michael, at 7, was still deciding what he wanted to be when he grew up, but was leaning toward being a horse trainer. Aunt Margaret passed away in her sleep in 1896, at the age of 82. She had lived to see Zelda's bookstore become a permanent fixture in Santa Fe, and to know that her niece had found true happiness. The funeral was well attended, a testament to how many lives she had touched through her kindness and generosity. In the evenings, Mason and Zelda would sit on their porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Sometimes they talked about the old days, about the wilderness and the fort and the letters they had written. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, needing no words. "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked one evening in the summer of 1898, 20 years after they had met. "Giving up the open country, settling down." Mason looked at her, his hair now touched with silver at the temples, his face more lined but still strong. "Not once. You and the children are my country now. Everything I need is right here. We were so young when we met. 22 and 26. We barely knew each other. We knew enough." He squeezed her hand. "We knew what mattered." Matthew had married the previous year, wedding a rancher's daughter named Sarah who was as practical and hardworking as he was. They lived on a small ranch outside the city, and Sarah was already pregnant with Mason and Zelda's first grandchild. Zara was being courted by a young journalist from Denver who appreciated her intelligence and writing talent. Michael was 10 and showing signs of his father's calm patience and his mother's stubborn determination. In 1899, their first grandchild was born, a little girl named Emma. Mason held her with the same careful tenderness he had shown his own children, his eyes bright with wonder. "We did this," he said to Zelda. "We created a family." "We did," Zelda agreed, her heart full. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. On New Year's Day 1900, the whole family gathered at Mason and Zelda's house for dinner. Matthew and Sarah were there with Emma. Zara had brought her journalist, who was now her fiancé. Michael was helping his father build new bookshelves for the ever-expanding bookstore. The house was full of laughter and love. 3 generations gathered together. That night, after everyone had left, Mason and Zelda stood on their porch and looked up at the stars, the same stars that had wheeled overhead that first night in the wilderness 22 years earlier. "I love you," Mason said, pulling her close. "I have loved you since the moment I found you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Zelda whispered. "You saved me in that wilderness, but you have saved me every day since in 1,000 small ways. You have given me everything I ever wanted and things I did not know to want. A home, a family, a partner who sees me and loves me for exactly who I am." He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and she melted into him the way she had 1,000 times before and would 1,000 times more. The years continued to roll forward, bringing change and constancy in equal measure. Matthew and Sarah had 2 more children, a son and another daughter. Zara married her journalist and moved to Denver, where she wrote for the newspaper and published her first novel to modest success. Michael followed his father into the guide business and proved to have a natural talent for it. In 1905, Zelda expanded the bookstore again, this time adding a section specifically for children's books. She believed that literacy started young, and she wanted every child in Santa Fe to have access to stories and learning. The expansion was funded in part by Mason's increasingly successful guide service, which had grown to employ 3 other trackers and scouts. In 1910, Zelda and Mason celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. Matthew gave a toast honoring the unlikely romance between a city woman and a wilderness tracker, a pairing that should not have worked but had somehow created a love that weathered decades. Zara read a passage from her latest novel, which featured characters clearly inspired by her parents. Michael presented them with a carved wooden bench for their porch, made with his own hands. The years had been kind to them. Mason's hair was now fully silver, and he moved a bit slower, but his eyes were still sharp and his hands still steady. Zelda's dark hair was streaked with gray, and she wore reading glasses now, but her mind was as keen as ever and her passion for books and learning had not dimmed. They still took walks every evening, weather permitting. They still held hands like young lovers. They still talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the kind of intimacy that only came from decades of shared life. In 1915, as the world beyond their corner of New Mexico territory was tearing itself apart in war, Mason and Zelda's world remained peaceful. They had 7 grandchildren now, ranging from Emma, who was 16 and already showing signs of being as independent and stubborn as her grandmother, to little Jacob, who was 2 and absolutely adored his grandfather. Mason retired from the guide business that year, turning it over to Michael and the other trackers. He was 63 and ready to slow down, to spend his days helping in the bookstore and playing with his grandchildren. Zelda had already begun to reduce her hours at the store, training younger women to take over the daily operations while she focused on the literacy programs. They were sitting on their porch one evening in the summer of 1916 when Zelda said, "You remember what you said to me that first night? When you found me in the wilderness, I said a lot of things. You said, 'I have got you.' Those were your first words to me, 'I have got you.'" Mason smiled at the memory. "I did say that. You have had me ever since. Through everything, all these years, you have had me." "And you have had me," he replied, "every day in every way." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Somewhere in the house, they could hear voices as Michael and his wife prepared dinner. Emma's laughter floated through the window as she played with her younger cousins. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. "No regrets?" Mason asked, echoing her question from years earlier. "Not a single one," Zelda said firmly. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner." He turned to look at her, his creek water eyes still as clear and honest as the day she met him. "But we have had a good run, you and I. A very good run." "The best," she agreed. They had many more good years ahead of them. Years of watching grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. Years of quietly serving their community, Mason through his knowledge of the land and Zelda through her bookstore and teaching. Years of simply being together, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life of profound meaning and joy. In 1922, they celebrated their 44th anniversary with a small party at the bookstore. The building had been expanded several times and now took up a full corner of the plaza. It was a Santa Fe institution, a place where generations had learned to read and love books. Pictures hung on the walls showing Zelda at various stages of her life. Young and determined when the store first opened, middle-aged and confident during the expansion, now older and wiser but still passionate about literacy and learning. Mason stood beside her as she cut the cake, his arm around her waist, and someone in the crowd called out, "Tell us the story, how you two met." The crowd took up the chant, and Zelda laughed and looked at Mason. He shrugged, smiling. "They are not going to let us out of it." So Zelda told the story, as she had told it dozens of times over the years, about being young and foolish and lost in the wilderness, about being saved by a tracker with gentle hands and a kind heart, about falling in love with the man who found her when she was at her most vulnerable and saw not weakness but strength. Mason added his perspective, about tracking a woman who had walked in circles but had kept her head well enough to survive 6 days, about finding her and knowing in that instant that his life had just changed forever, about being brave enough to court her despite all the reasons it should not work. By the time they finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. Young couples looked at each other with new appreciation. Old couples nodded in understanding, and their children and grandchildren beamed with pride at the legacy of love their parents and grandparents had created. In 1925, Mason fell ill with pneumonia. It was a bad winter, and even with the best medical care Santa Fe could provide, his recovery was slow. Zelda barely left his side, reading to him and holding his hand and willing him to get better. He pulled through, but it aged him, and he never quite regained his full strength. "I am not done with you yet," she told him fiercely as he convalesced. "We still have years ahead of us." "Yes, madam," he said with a weak smile. "Whatever you say." He did recover, though he moved more slowly and tired more easily. They adjusted, as they had adjusted to every challenge over the decades. They hired help for the heavier chores around the house. They took shorter walks. They spent more time simply sitting together, enjoying each other's company. In 1928, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. It was a grand affair, organized by their children and attended by what seemed like half of Santa Fe. There were speeches and toasts and a beautifully decorated cake. A photographer captured them cutting the cake together, Mason's hand over Zelda's, both of them smiling. Later, looking at the photograph, Zelda marveled at how far they had come. Two people who should never have met, whose lives had intersected through chance and tragedy and stubborn determination. She traced Mason's face in the photo, seeing the young tracker she had fallen in love with still visible in the lines and weathering of age. "We did all right, did we not?" she said to him that night as they prepared for bed. "Better than all right," he replied. "We did magnificently." The next years were gentle. They slowed down further but never stopped. Zelda still went to the bookstore several times a week, though mostly to visit and chat with the staff she had trained. Mason still took walks through the countryside, though shorter ones, identifying plants and animal tracks for his great-grandchildren with the same patience he had shown his own children. In 1930, as Mason approached his 78th birthday, he told Zelda he wanted to take one more trip into the wilderness. "Nothing extensive," he assured her when she looked alarmed. "Just overnight, out to where I found you if I can remember the way." "I am coming with you," she said immediately. "Zelda, it is rough country. You are 74 years old. And you are 77. If you can manage it, so can I." They made the journey in early autumn when the heat had broken but the cold had not yet settled in. Michael drove them as far as he could in his truck, then they rode horses the rest of the way. It took most of a day to reach the area where Mason had found Zelda all those years ago. The land had not changed much. The overhang where she had collapsed was still there, weathered by 5 decades of wind and rain. The seep where she had found water had dried up, but the rock depression remained. They made camp nearby, and Mason built a fire with the same efficiency he had shown as a young man. They sat by the fire as darkness fell, and Zelda said, "I was so frightened that day, I thought I was going to die out here." "But you did not," Mason said. "You survived. You were strong enough to survive, and I was lucky enough to find you." "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. "Do you think we were meant to find each other?" Mason considered the question carefully. "I do not know about fate, but I know that I am grateful for every twist and turn that brought us together. Grateful for your stubborn refusal to wait for a new guide. Grateful for that rattlesnake that spooked your horse. Grateful for every step you took that led you here where I could find you." "I am grateful too," Zelda said, "for all of it, even the fear and the pain, because it brought me to you." They slept that night under the stars, wrapped in blankets, listening to the sounds of the wilderness. In the morning, they rode back to where Michael was waiting, both of them feeling that they had closed some circle, had returned to the beginning of their story and found it still good. The years continued. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. They welcomed more great-grandchildren. They watched the world change around them, automobiles replacing horses, electricity coming to even the remote corners of New Mexico, the country recovering from economic depression. Through it all, Mason and Zelda remained constants for their family and their community. The bookstore still bore Zelda's name and values. The guide service still operated on the principles Mason had established. Their children carried forward their legacy of honesty, hard work, and deep love. In 1935, Mason Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83. He went to bed one night holding Zelda's hand and simply did not wake up. Zelda, lying beside him, knew the moment his breathing stopped. She lay there for a long time, holding his hand, feeling the warmth gradually leave his body, saying goodbye to the man who had been her partner for 57 years. The funeral was enormous. It seemed everyone in Santa Fe and beyond turned out to honor the tracker who had become a legend, the man who had found countless lost souls and brought them home. But the most touching moments were the quietest ones, when his children and grandchildren spoke about the kind of man he had been. Patient, wise, gentle, strong. A man who loved deeply and showed it every day in 1,000 small ways. Zelda stood at his grave and spoke last. "He saved my life," she said simply. "But more than that, he made my life worth living. He saw me, truly saw me, and loved what he saw. He supported my dreams and built his own beside mine. He was my partner, my love, my home. And though he is gone from this world, he will never be gone from my heart. I will carry him with me until we meet again." She lived for another 8 years after Mason's death. She spent them surrounded by family, still visiting the bookstore, still teaching literacy classes when she felt up to it. But everyone could see that a light had gone out in her. She was still Zelda, still fierce and intelligent and caring, but there was a sadness now, a missing piece that could never be replaced. She spoke often of Mason, telling stories to her great-great-grandchildren who had never met him. About the tracker who could find anything, who saw trails where others saw only rock and dust. About the gentle man who held her through grief and celebrated her triumphs. About the love that had sustained them through more than half a century of life together. On a warm evening in May of 1943, Zelda Lawrence Kane passed away quietly in her sleep, in the same bed where Mason had died 8 years earlier. She was 87 years old. Her children found her in the morning, looking peaceful, a slight smile on her face, wearing the turquoise necklace Mason had given her all those years ago. At her funeral, they told the story one more time. The story of a woman who got lost in the wilderness and the tracker who found her. The story of a love that defied expectations and built a legacy. The story of two people who chose each other and kept choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. They were buried side by side in a small cemetery outside Santa Fe, their headstones simple but elegant. The inscriptions read, Mason Kane, 1852. 1935. He found his way home. Zelda Lawrence Kane, 1856. 1943. She was never lost again. The bookstore continued to operate for decades more, eventually being taken over by Zara's daughter and then by her granddaughter. It remained a gathering place for learning and community, a testament to Zelda's vision and passion. The guide service eventually evolved into a wilderness education program, teaching people to respect and understand the land the way Mason had. His great-grandson ran it, passing on the skills and values Mason had taught his own children, and every generation told the story. About the summer of 1878, when a young woman got lost in the New Mexico wilderness, and a young tracker followed her trail. About how they fell in love against all odds and built a life that touched countless others. About how true love, the kind that sees and values and supports, can create ripples that spread through time, touching lives decades after the original lovers are gone. It was a story about being lost and being found, about fear transformed into courage, about two people from different worlds who created their own world together. It was a story that began with a horse throwing its rider into a ravine and a tracker reading sign in the dust. And it was a story that never really ended, because its legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who carried forward the values of honesty, love, and fierce commitment that Mason and Zelda had embodied. In the end, it was a story about home. Not a place, but a person. About finding the one soul in all the world who sees you completely and loves you anyway. About building a life together, brick by brick, year by year, through joy and sorrow, through strength and weakness, through youth and age. It was a love story. The kind that people tell around fires and dinner tables for generations. The kind that makes people believe in the possibility of finding their own great love. The kind that proves that sometimes being lost is exactly what you need to be found by the right person. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this world, Mason and Zelda were together again, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, looking out over the wild country they had both loved. Together again, as they always would be. For as long as stars wheeled overhead and wind sang through the canyons and love stories were told by firelight, forever home,